My story begins in Mexico, in San Luis Potosí, when my parents decide that because for economic reasons, they have to go to El Norte, and they have to take their 6 kids and me to El Norte. So when I was 16 years old, I wrote a poem called Journey to El Norte, and it goes like this. My father came to the U.S. He entered not by the island, where the lady stands tall and green with her torch, but by the dark and cold borders, divided by rivers, fences, wild mountains filled with rats, snakes, coyotes, and border patrol officers waiting for you to fall. It wasn't until the 4th attempt that my father managed to find work and not get caught. The money he earned, he sent back to the little pueblo where we remained. On an unexpected night, my mother came to my bedside and said, "We're going." "Going where?" I curiously asked. "To join your father in la ciudad de Los Angeles." Angeles? Angels? Wow. We left at night trying to stay out of sight. We took a bus, then a train, then a bus again. The journey took 3 days and a lot of hours of dreaming of my father and the clouds and the gates and the music and the angels. I kept staring at the wheels of the bus, waiting for them to lift us up into the sky. You see, I truly believed we were going to heaven. We had reached Los Angeles, but we were still on earth. We had reached Los Angeles, and this isn't heaven, but it is my home. We are in Los Angeles. We are in Boyle Heights, and this is my home. Now, the story really begins here in Boyle Heights. My parents came here like many immigrants because they couldn't afford to live anywhere else. And so I quickly, let me just start by saying this, that I was undocumented for 13 years. So if you see me crying throughout any of this presentation, just know that to be able to stand here and to tell you that I was undocumented and to pretend that it was not dehumanizing, that it was, you see, when you're undocumented and you're called an alien, it's a dehumanization. It's a violence against your innocence. And so to pretend that it didn't hurt me is just wrong. I told myself I wasn't going to do that. So anyway, I came to this country and I immediately discovered television because in my family, even though we lived in the US, in my house, it was still Mexico. So television became my window to the outside world. And then I quickly discovered that Latinos and Mexicans, that we were invisible. We were not there. And so I really began to, as a little girl, I really began to think, well, maybe we really are invisible. And then I started to think, well, what if we really are aliens? What if we really are from another planet and people don't know that we're here? That's why I hate that word. You see, when you call someone an alien, you dehumanize them. And that little girl really believed she was an alien. Anyway, so eventually, there were Latinos on television, but then we went from being invisible to being the bad guys. We went from being them, we were them. We were the servants. We were the Latin lovers. We were the wetbacks. We were all those people whose stories never get to be told. So I grew up wanting to tell our stories. But to be honest with you, when I first started writing stories, I couldn't even write about my life because I was invisible to me. My first story was about a girl named Marcy from Massachusetts. And I figured that, she was much more interesting than me because, me, I was invisible. I didn't matter. So I finally took my first writing class. And it was at 15 when I had a wonderful writing teacher who told me that I had to write about me. She ordered me to write about me. She said, write about what you know, and you have to tell it from your point of view. And I was like, I can't do that. Because you see, at that time, I didn't see myself as a protagonist. Because, I couldn't even challenge injustice in my own house with all the machismo. I couldn't even, own my anger. Because as a woman, you're not allowed to own your anger, because if you do, then you're called a bitch. And that's when women shut up. That's when women stop talking because nobody wants to be called a bitch. And so I was very scared and I couldn't own my anger. And then I read this beautiful book called Fat is a Feminist Issue, which said that anger is a great thing because anger is what allows you to challenge injustice at whatever level. Anger is what we sometimes call passion. So I was able to finally embrace my anger, and I was able to finally acknowledge what was going on in my life and how painful it was. And you see, there was another thing that was going on with me. At that time I didn't know, but I have ADD. And you see, at that time, only boys were being diagnosed with ADD. And I also suffered from depression and dyslexia and a bunch of other things that now I understand. But at that time, I was suffering. I was suffering because I didn't know what I was going through, but also it was so hard to live in two worlds. My parents expected me to live in Mexico, even though I was in the US. They expected me to be subservient and to be the perfect daughter. And then I felt that I was expected as an American to be an individual, to achieve, but also to assimilate and to remain invisible. And I was caught between these two worlds, and I didn't know what to do. It was so much pain. And then, of course, you know, I was 18 years old, and I wanted to go to college so badly, but I couldn't go because I was undocumented, and it was killing me. So I finally started writing. And thank God I started writing, because if I hadn't started writing, I would have committed suicide. I know I would have. So luckily, the pages took my pain, and I was able to write and tell my story about the struggles of living in two worlds and about the machismo. The fact that my father would tell me that, it was a waste to educate women, things like that. And so I started writing the story called Simply Maria, or The American Dream. And it got produced. It was on stage. And I remember when it was on stage, I said, oh my God, it was as if I finally saw myself as a human being on stage. And I was like a real woman of flesh and blood. And that gave me the courage to believe that I could be the protagonist of my life. You see, at that time, back in the 80s, if you were a fat woman, you weren't supposed to love your life, and especially your body. You were just supposed to shut up and lose weight. And instead, I had the courage to believe that despite being undocumented, despite suffering from depression, despite being Mexican, being poor, and having so many flaws, that I could actually believe that my life was worth something. So I decided to write about my life, about working in a sewing factory. And I wrote the story of 5 full-figured women who work in a sewing factory, who have a lot of challenges, but they also have the power to overcome them. This story became so successful and eventually became an award-winning movie called Real Women Have Curves. Now, after the success of this movie, I had so many women come up to me and say, you know what? I no longer call myself fat or chunky. I'm a real woman. And that's so great, because by Hollywood standards, a woman who's a size over 6 is considered fat. Do you know that? I'm a size 14. That's the average size of a woman. I'm a real woman. I wanted to share a poem with you. It's called I Am the 99%. I am the man who set himself on fire to protest injustice. I am the man and woman one September day who responded to a tweet to occupy Wall Street and actually took a stand for the rest of us. I am the brown and yellow woman who's going blind from making brand name merchandise for giant corporations, which I can never, ever afford. I am the young, brave brown warrior previously incarcerated who cannot find a job or a place in society. I am the hungry woman who could not feed her children because there isn't enough for the poorest 1%. I am the silver-haired senior in a nursing home who can't recall the days when people mattered and corporations were not people. I am the soldier returning home to no victory parade, nor with limbs or hopes or nights of restful sleep. I am the ghetto child dumbed down, vaccinated, and left behind to live a life of indentured servitude. I am the sex slave, kidnapped and tortured to cater to the perversions and the rituals of the 1% of the 1%. I am an American who believes in the American dream, with the ideals of the Constitution, who feels a hole in the heart. And I am also half of the sky, but owner of only 20% of the earth, with freedom less than 1% of the time between the hours of sunlight. But I am also the 1% who knows. I am already a whole person with undeniable human and divine rights to feel loved and valued, and I know that I was already born free. And this I know because my heart tells me so. And for this, I'll fight 100% of the time, even if they sick dogs on me or hose me with hate, cut me in pieces, shred me to nothing, rob me of every ounce of humanity, reduce me to blood and dust. When you are already whole and divine, God whispers into my soul, no one can hurt you. Do what you must. Allow the love, the good, the light to triumph over evil. This I know because my heart tells me so. Father Greg Boyle talks about this beautiful circle of compassion and the people that are left out. Well, we all have the power to reach out and bring people to the circle of compassion so that they too may stand in the light. I am very lucky that as a storyteller and now a writing teacher that I too get to tell my students, write your story. Write about what you know, tell it from your point of view. We must tell our stories so that we all finally get it, that we are already all connected. If Hollywood isn't telling our stories, then we must do it ourselves. We must make our stories matter. And this I know because God told me so. Thank you.